Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the regularly scheduled Public Safety and Emergency Management Committee. Today is Wednesday, September 18th, 2019, and I am joined by the council members who are part of this committee. Councilmember Jeremiah Ellison, Councilmember Steve Fletcher, Councilmember Linnea Palmisano, and I am Alondra Cano, and together we are a quorum of the committee and therefore can conduct the business before us today. We have the agenda before us with 7 items, and item number 1 is a public comment period. Items 2, 3, 4, and 5 are consent items, and then we have 2 items for discussion, which is an MPD 911 work group update, followed by a 911 call process review. Do we have any questions on the agenda before we adopt it? Seeing no questions, all those in favor of adopting the agenda, please say aye. Aye. And let's begin with our public comment period. So anybody that is here to share comments with the committee is more than welcome to come forward and state your name and your address and your thoughts. Since we don't have anybody here for public comment period, we shall receive and file. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. And for consent, we have item number 2, which is a Minnesota Department of Public Safety grant for a DWI officer. Item number 3 is an HIDTA program grant for participation on the HIDTA Regional Task Force. Item number 4 under consent is a University of Minnesota Good Neighbor Fund grant for crime and safety awareness. And item number 5 is a contract amendment to the Joint Powers Agreement with the Minnesota Department of Public Safety for participation in the state's Human Trafficking Task Force. All those in favor of approving the consent agenda, please say aye. Aye. And that moves forward. So that brings us to our discussion items today, and we're going to begin with item number 6, which is an update or a status report on the MPD 911 work group. And so what I did is I actually handed out a copy of the staff direction that Councilmember Andrew Johnson authored and the full City Council approved, which was passed in December of 2018. So this is for background information for our colleagues here. And so this is a simple status update. We understand the work is still ongoing, and we'd love to hear from staff about what's been the process so far, what have been some preliminary findings, and what we anticipate the future of this work group will look like. Take it away.
Great. Thank you. Good morning, Chair Cano, council members. I'm Andrea Larson, Director of Strategic Management in the Coordinator's Office. So I will be briefly presenting an update on the work group. The work group purpose, is more broad, but there are important pillars of information that will help us all interpret the work group findings better. One of those pillars is around better understanding 911 MPD data, which we'll do at a study session currently planned for October 10th. And another critical aspect of this work to understand is how our 911 response system works. So Director Kathy Hughes will be giving a more in-depth presentation following my brief overview on that process. Thank you for handing out the full staff direction. I took the sort of main highlight from it, which is that the work group was formed to essentially address and look at all of the 911 calls that come into the city, the many aspects of how we respond, and new ideas to leverage current or new resources in and out of the city differently. The work group is made up of staff from MPD, Fire, Health, the Attorney's Office, IT, as well as 6 community members. As a group, our deliverable is to provide a set of recommendations and potential risks, benefits, and trade-offs to the council. While we're striving for consensus, we will plan to provide alternative perspectives on recommendations, if there are any, to ensure that all perspectives are represented in our final recommendations. The work group is structured such that we have 4 meetings. The first was in August and looked at data really in depth. And that data was then used to generate ideas. We received over 50 ideas, which was great. In the second meeting, we took those ideas and ranked them based on a set of criteria to identify which ones we wanted to move forward into the vetting phase. And we are currently in the vetting phase where we're looking at potential legal, financial, time, and/or personnel implications for the city based on the selected ideas. The third meeting will be reviewing the results of that vetting. During the vetting phase, some staff, if there are barriers identified in the ideas, are making suggestions for potential alternatives, and we'll be discussing that as a group. After the third meeting, we will have a second round of vetting if new or alternative ideas arise, and then during the fourth meeting, we will finalize our recommendations. At the fourth meeting, we'll also have a discussion about how we want to handle the ideas that did not move forward into vetting for this year, because actually it was a really great list. It was a function of being able to really dig in and do good analysis on a smaller set of ideas. So we will also bring, with the final recommendations, suggestions for how to move the other ideas forward. The next step, so as I mentioned, we are in the phase of internal vetting. And as I have been doing, I can continue to share the outcomes of each meeting with you so you're apprised of the progress following the milestones after each meeting. I'd just like to pause here to thank the work group members for their commitment and openness to this process, especially the community members who are volunteering their time. There's a lot of information that we're covering at the meetings on a complex topic, and the group has worked hard to be cohesive and creative, and it's really been a privilege to work on this project so far. With that, I can stand for questions.
Thank you for that overview. And again, this is a status report on the process. And so I wanted to note before we dive into questions or comments that we have been joined by Council members Andrea Jenkins and Philippe Cunningham. I'll open up the floor to comments, questions, concerns. Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for this update. I'm just curious about what was the process of selecting the 6 community members, and what geographic areas do they represent?
Since it's a work group and not an appointed board and commission, the process was to solicit public applications. We had to open the application process twice, and then Councilmember Johnson, the council had 3 selections and the mayor had 3 selections, and so the mayor's office made their selections, and Councilmember Johnson made the other 3 selections in discussions with other council members. I would have to go back and check which wards the community members represent and can confirm that with you.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Can you talk to me a little bit more about what you anticipate will be the final presentation in November, whether you think it'll happen before the budget, or I know it says kind of like November-ish, that gets us really close to the first set of budget hearings. So is this a date you're hoping to finalize soon?
Yeah, so the final work group meeting is November 8th, and the following, the first public safety committee meeting after the 4th meeting is November 13th. And so my goal would be to have our recommendations well enough set that we can present those at the 13th meeting. If for some reason the work group is really working through some things and we have to do some additional research, then we would be looking at the later Public Safety Committee meeting. And of course, at your discretion, we could find, there is a committee of the whole meeting that's between those two if that second Public Safety meeting feels like it's too late in the process. But we do plan to bring our final recommendations in the 1 to 3 weeks following the final meeting.
Okay. And then I saw a note here in the staff direction about calls that must, by state law or other legal requirements, be responded to by POST, board certified law enforcement officers. I'm curious if you can shed any light on the conversation that the work group has had around that, if that seems to be a pretty substantial amount of calls that need to be responded to in that manner, or if there's actually much more flexibility than we would anticipate.
Yeah, and I'll ask our attorney president to weigh in on that since he's been at the work group meetings.
Oh, okay.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, There are certain categories of calls that require a peace officer response, such as domestic abuse calls where an arrest might have to be made. Any call that could result in an arrest, a peace officer needs to go do that. A large category of domestic abuse calls require a police report. And so our domestic abuse team in the city attorney's office think it would be highly problematic to not have a police officer go do that. Mm-hmm. The larger categories of calls that we respond to, or the MPD responds to, such as any call that would require a code 2 or a code 3 rapid response, a police officer has to do that. Anytime anybody's going to get arrested or a warrant needs to be served, the state statutes aren't, they don't present a long list of things that a peace officer must respond to, but it's kind of the broader categories of, if a weapon is involved, of course, a peace officer would only a peace officer would be dispatched to that. But there are broad categories of 911 calls, such as anything that would just require a report. For instance, a non-injury vehicle accident, things like that. We already do some of that as a city, with regards to parking issues and things like that. The large, vigorous traffic control unit responds to all parking issues, things like that. But anyway, there are some categories of calls that a peace officer must respond to, but we would, as a city, we would probably always send a police officer to those kinds of things anyway. So.
Right, and so your response makes me think about what is the process that the 911 dispatchers are using to sort out when a peace officer is required by law to, respond and not. So it'll be interesting to hear more about that in November. So thank you for your response. I'm going to make a note here that our goal is the Wednesday, November 13th PSEM meeting, just to note for my colleagues in case they want to be sure to be here for that one, and then we'll work together to really concretely identify that date. I see comments or questions from Councilmember Palmisano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Is the study session in your next step slide here that's now on October 10th? It was moved just recently.
Yes.
Part of this work group, or is it part of another ask by council offices?
It is a part of this work group. We plan to present the data that was presented at the first meeting of the work group. The work group found that conversation really valuable. I think, depending on what question you ask, the way the system works at the city is that you can get slightly different numbers depending on how you ask your question. And so it was really, really helpful as a work group to look at the same data and make sure we were all on the same page before moving forward and understand what research question had been asked in order to get that information. And because the work group is staff and community members only, we've had interest from council members to also be able to see that information so that when the recommendations come, we're all referencing the same information. And so it will be the same data that was shared with the work group. And it was, a really valuable conversation, I think, for the work group to be able to dig in and try to understand the data. And we'd like to do that in advance of the recommendations coming out so that when the recommendations come, it's really clear, what data we were referencing.
Thank you. I am one of those council members that has been clamoring to get in and been told not to, and I'm not very good at not involving myself in these kinds of things. Can you speak a little bit to what has taken this process so long? I think that some of it was on our end, and that's useful to know as to how we come up with staff directions. I mean, one thing is that maybe this shouldn't be part of a budget process when there's no money attached, when this is just something, just for colleagues, an open question that if there are staff directions like this, maybe they should not just be rushed in at the end of a budget process every year. Could you help us do better in the future and tell us a little bit more about some of the delays here? I think that some of them were about getting community members to participate.
Yeah, so we started the process. The staff direction was passed at the end of December, and we started the process of drafting the application in March. We posted twice between March or we opened it in May. We did not receive a large enough number of applications, meaning fewer than what the staff direction had asked for, and so we reopened it again in May. We closed it in the end of May. It went to the mayor and council for selections. Those were completed by like the third week of July, and then within 3 weeks of the selection, we had our first meeting. The timing for the meetings is to ensure that we have appropriate time between meetings to do analysis and work both by staff and community members in preparation for each of the meetings. So there's a significant amount of work that happens between each meeting by myself and other staff and by community members thinking of and vetting ideas and doing research and assessing data, et cetera. And so that's why we've have 3 to 4 weeks between each meeting to make sure that that work can happen. So our time together, which is difficult to find, as I'm sure you can understand, is really valuable and our best use of time.
Thank you. It looks like you are going as fast as you can with all the work that this work group has taken on. I do want to point out that maybe sitting with all the applications and waiting 2 months to actually get that going underway is a miss on our part as a council as a whole.
Chair Cano, Councilmember Palmisano? Maybe, yes.
Alrighty, I don't see any more questions or comments, so I think we are wrapped up with your portion of it. Thank you very much, and we look forward to the findings and recommendations in November.
Thank you.
So let me go back to our agenda here really quick. This is then a motion to receive and file an update on the process, work to date, and expected outcomes from the 911 MPD work group. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. And next, we have a presentation by our 911 director, Kathy Hughes, who is here to help us better understand the 911 call process and how that gets handed over to MPD. So I just want to take a brief minute to contextualize this and to manage expectations about what we're going to dive into just now. And so what this presentation is meant to do is to help council members better understand and learn about our 911 department. And this is the first time that the 911 department has been asked or been invited to give us a presentation. So it's a new thing for many of us here, even though this committee's almost been running for 2 years now. So it's both an exciting opportunity and an opportunity to really get our hands around how our 911 department handles the 911 call system. And so this is going to be a primer. We don't expect to be diving into many details here or things like a 10-year comparative analysis of all the 911 calls that have come into Minneapolis. That's not what this session is going to be about. This session is going to be about introducing us to this topic, to helping us understand at a high level how this system works, and we can certainly tee up deeper conversations in specific areas in the future, or perhaps that they can be weaved into the work that's going to happen at the study group. And I wanted to mention that our director here, Kathy Hughes, has been with the city for maybe 2 months or so. So we're both going to see you lead today, but also you're probably going to learn a lot about how the council manages these presentations and invitations for staff members to come forward. So without further ado, please go ahead and get us started.
Good morning, Council Chair Cano and council members. My name is Kathy Hughes. I am the Director of Emergency Communications. Today, I'm going to give you an overview of what emergency communications is and what we do. So who are we? We are the link between the public safety, or the public and the emergency responders. Currently, we have 61 dispatchers. We are in the process right now of actively hiring to get our numbers up to 69. That is what we are slotted for dispatchers. And we have one operations manager, Janelle Harris, who's here with me today. We have a training and quality assurance manager. We have one training and quality assurance specialist. We have 8 911 supervisors, and we are currently working on the hiring process to hire one more. And we have 3 admin staff, and we're in the process of hiring one more to get our numbers up to 85, which would meet our, which we are authorized for. So our overall budget is a little over 10 million, 10,328,481. And this would all meet our staffing needs. The next slide shows our org chart. It outlines what I just defined with numbers. So currently, we staff our center to meet the service level needs. So depending on the day, if there's a big event or a large scale, anything in the city, we would staff up our dispatchers. They all work 10-hour shifts right now. We have 3 main shifts, a days, middle, and night shift, and then we have 2 power shifts that balance the main core shifts. We are open 24/7, 365 days a year. So our internal customers consist of Minneapolis Police Department, Minneapolis Fire, Minneapolis Park Police, Hennepin EMS, and North Memorial Ambulance. So what do we do at MECC? We answer 911 calls. We also answer a 10-digit line, which is just your regular phone system. Some of those calls that come in on the 10-digit lines can turn emergent in nature. In 2018, we answered a little over 561,000 calls. 418,000 of those were 911, and the 142,000 were the 10-digit calls that I referred to, or the admin calls. We also dispatch for police and fire, and we provide EMS resources. So the 911 call flow, what that means is a 911 call comes in, it's received at the center, it's answered by a dispatcher, and then the caller information and call details are entered into our CAD system, and our CAD system is our computer-aided dispatch system. That's the system that allows the dispatcher to talk to the first responders, our police, fire, our EMS, whether they're in their vehicles or they could be in a station or a precinct. That's how they get the information to them, via the CAD system. So once it's entered into CAD, a dispatcher assigns the call to the appropriate precinct squad, and then the dispatcher sends the appropriate resources. It could be police, it could be fire, it could be EMS, it could be all of them or some of them. So Minneapolis has a diverse culture, and we use a language line interpretation service to assist the community when calling 911. I have stats from 2017 that show over 4,300 calls required the use of the language line interpretation service. It's a very good service, and we've had very good luck with it. So I want to outline what a PSAP is. You may hear this in language about dispatch centers. So a PSAP is a public safety answering point, and they're responsible for receiving and answering 911 calls. In the city of Minneapolis, there's MECC is a PSAP, the University of Minnesota has a PSAP, and then there's 2 secondary PSAPs, which is Hennepin EMS and North Memorial Ambulance. What that means is they don't actually receive 911 calls. They get transferred to them by either MECC or U of M or any other PSAP in the area. In Hennepin County, there's 8 separate PSAPs. So Airport, Bloomington, Eden Prairie, Edina, who dispatches for also Richfield, Hennepin County, who dispatches for all the communities they serve, Minneapolis, us, as St. Louis Park, and U of M. So technology, 911 changes with technology, and right now it's in the up mode for what's next. In 1990, less than 10% of calls were wireless, meaning on a cell phone. Today, 85% of 911 calls are wireless, so quite a difference. Moving forward, next generation 911 is the focus, it's the future. So Next Gen 911 is a digital or that internet protocol, the IP-based service. It uses the 911 network to push more information, data through the 911 service. Right now, we are using text to 911, which was introduced December of 2017 in the state of Minnesota. Data and video will be coming in the future. That is a state-run project, and they help all the regions within the state to implement and get resources available to put into play. It will be nice once video and data, text more can get received by a dispatcher. You know, real-time video can get sent out to first responders immediately, so which will help in the process. Our facilities in the basement of City Hall. It was built in 1989, and it was remodeled in 2003. It includes an emergency operations center, which is located right inside the dispatch center, and our backup is located outside or off-site. So this is a picture of our operations floor. It doesn't show the dispatch areas. Those are two separate areas, but this is where the call taking, the immediate call comes in. You all are very welcome to come down and sit. You can listen to calls anytime you want. We would love to have you come visit. The 911 Dispatcher Workstation, it shows multiple computer systems that they have to learn and be fluid to use. Right now they have the CAD equipment, which I defined. It's the computer that allows the dispatcher to talk to the first responder, the officer, firefighter, EMS, mobily in their MDCs. We also have a computerized phone system. Minneapolis is on a shared consolidated phone system, which means we share a 911 phone system with 4 other agencies in the metro. So we share it with Hennepin County, Edina, Hennepin EMS, and Alina. And the benefits of having a consolidated phone system is the cost, the resources. We all share the money portion of it, and we are given things we probably couldn't afford on our own. It's the new thing in the nation. We were very excited to be a part of this. We also have an 800 megahertz radio computer, and they have a city computer, which they have access to their internet and email all on their consoles. 911, we hire everybody as a dispatcher, but when they come in, they're trained for call taking first. That gives them the customer service piece, how to answer a call, how to ask questions, the computer skills, call processing, how do you process a call, and the geography piece. So our call takers take up to 560 hours of training, but that also includes the one-on-one coaching they receive. It averages out to about 70 days just for the call taking piece. They then move on to dispatcher training, which is divided between police and fire. They start with police. That has a bit of a longer time frame to train. They get about 440 hours of additional training on top of their call taker training. And for fire, they get 130 extra hours. Total training is about 4.5 months. So moving forward, we are continuing to improve communication with Minneapolis police and fire departments. And we are working with all stakeholders and partners to update processes. I feel we have a great chance to look into the city trends and calls for service and determine, industry best practice and how that will work for us as a city. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Hughes. So now we'll shift over to questions and comments, and I have a couple, so I'll get us started. I was curious, do you have any bilingual staff currently on the team? 911 dispatch folks?
Yes.
Okay, what languages?
Go ahead. Sorry. No, go ahead.
Council, Council Chair and council members, thank you. We do have bilingual staff. Mostly they speak Spanish, sorry about that. But we do not have staff that are certified interpreters, to my knowledge. So that's why we contract with Language Line. Another concern is that depending on who answers the call at any one time, calls aren't necessarily chosen by the dispatchers that are sitting at the call taking positions. They're delivered. So there's no guarantee that the caller is being delivered to somebody who is interpreter certified to speak that language. That's why we found a lot of success contracting with Language Line.
Can you talk to me, kind of walk me through what the process looks like if a caller calls 911 and they only speak Spanish, for example? What is the interaction between the two people at that point, and by when does it get to an actual person that can connect with them in a different language?
Our staff are extremely talented at immediately recognizing that this is a caller that they were going to need interpreter services with. They'll generally very quickly get Language Line on the phone. In the meantime, those that have picked up some different languages than their primary language they've become very adept at least recognizing key terms like fire or emergency, and then they're pretty good at just trying to get an address out of them while they're waiting for the connection with Language Line to take place. Once Language Line is on the phone, they can assist with identifying what language is being spoken if we aren't sure right away. Our staff also are pretty good at kind of gleaning which language is coming in, using some terms that they've picked up along the way to identify what language is being spoken.
And is Language Line a 24-hour service as well?
Yes.
Round the clock?
Yes.
Okay. How much money is the contract with Language Line?
29,000 was 2 years ago.
So it's an annual contract?
It's a fee. It's fee-based on use.
Oh, okay. Got it. Okay. Shifting to a different question, is 911 slated to move into the new building that is getting built by the city?
We are not.
Okay, so you'll be here in City Hall?
Correct.
Okay. Could you go back to the slide that has the boxes of call process?
Yes.
I think, yeah, there we go. So I'm curious about the third one where it says a dispatcher assigns the call to the appropriate precinct squad. Can you walk us through what that process looks like? What happens when the phone call comes in and then the dispatcher picks up the phone? What are the steps that the person has to go through before it gets handed off to somebody else?
So the call taker's role is to get as much information as possible in the briefest amount of time. So they gather as much information in order to push the information while they stay on the call to the dispatcher. As long as they can get enough information for the dispatcher to determine what resources are needed, that's the first goal. Does that answer your question?
What do they have a script? Do they?
You mean as far as gathering information? We used to have ProQA, and we just
I don't know what
have moved
ProQA
away.
is.
Excuse me?
What is ProQA?
Right. We used to have ProQA, which is a dispatch protocol system where there is an actual script where the call taker has to read questions. The problem with ProQA was it didn't integrate with our CAD system, and it delayed calls, delayed response time, and it just didn't meet the needs of the city. We are eliminating ProQA. That will be effective October 31st. So currently our dispatchers are trained in order to answer calls and how to ask questions. They're very good at what they do, and they do this day after day after day. So they do ask the correct questions on their own. That's where their training comes in. Once they get that information, then the dispatcher handles it.
Okay, and so then the call gets sent to the inspector of the area? I don't understand what happens next. If you could tell me, I would rather have you tell me than me guess the
Sure.
different ways that this
So once the
happens.
dispatcher gets the call, they determine what resources are needed. So we'll use a police call, for example. They find whatever squad is available in that precinct or area, and then they route that call to them, and they handle the call.
So the 911 dispatcher is directly calling a squad car.
Correct. They call them over the radio, and they put their call into their queue and their MDCs once they answer the call.
Okay. I'm going to ask questions about what happens after that, which I think will have MPD come up for that. But if there are other questions for our 911 director now, before I shift over to the other portion, Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair. I mostly wanted to say welcome. This is your first time here at the committee, and you know, obviously, I think a lot of times when we're looking at, as we get deeper into the data later on, we'll point to the areas for improvement and the things that we want to work on. But I want your team to hear how much we appreciate their work and how much we know how challenging it is to hear people in distress for your whole shift and to you know, manage that process. I think that can be really tough work, and just really appreciate the work that your team does. And I wanted to give you a chance to brag a little bit. What's something, you've been here a couple months now, so you've seen what we're good at and what we're not as good at and where we need to improve. What's something we're good at that we should be bragging about? What's one of the things that Minneapolis 911 does well?
Thank you for those comments, Councilmember Fletcher. I truly want to, I'm very thankful that I'm here. I'm very excited to be in this position. The staff at MECC are wonderful. I feel we have the best dispatchers in the state, but you always want to brag about your own center. I feel our dispatchers are solid. They care. They take the time to listen to the caller, which is so important to get the proper information and proper responses. As far as what am I the most proud of right now is just the staff, how we've all come together with new leadership and new direction, and we're all working as a team to make the city shine.
Councilmember Palmisano, followed by Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To this point, the third square here of how a dispatcher assigns the call to an appropriate precinct squad, I'm curious, if not a little bit embarrassed that I don't know this already, but park police get dispatched by location only in terms of where the call came in from, or also by type of call? I guess, how are your dispatchers making a decision between whether they send park police, whether they send MPD, or whether they perhaps assign the call to an off-duty officer that is signed into CAD?
So you're correct, it's by location, and then it's also by type of call. So we do have guidance for our dispatchers and our call takers as they're processing calls. Based on the nature of the call, they're given guidance on who would be assigned to that call as well. And if it's a call that is on park property, park police are assigned to the call, they're added to the call. So they do have guidelines that they follow, and that helps them determine not only park police, but park police, MPD, fire, EMS, who would respond on a call of that nature.
So a follow-up, if I may. Ms. Harris, then when you say park police would be added to a call, does that mean they're always an overlay?
I wouldn't say always, but they do assist MPD quite frequently. They're strong partners with MPD on their calls.
Mm-hmm. I am aware of several police calls that happen in our parks, mostly on our parkways. I represent an area with a lot of parkways, but I did wonder if those were self-initiated service or not by MPD. It sounds like maybe not.
Self-initiated service, I wouldn't say self-initiated service by MPD. Yeah, I guess
I'm sorry.
Right, I'm just trying to get
Deputy Chief Waite, I would welcome.
Thank you, ma'am. So as far as activity along the parkway, officers do definitely support Park PD. And if they are in closer proximity to a call and it was a high priority in progress call where there might be potential injuries or threats thereof, they would be the squad that would be responding immediately just because of proximity. Does that answer your question?
I think so. So also then when off-duty officers are signed into CAD, which we know isn't always the case, but is often the case, then would an off-duty officer be assigned to a call if it is at or near the location that they are working off-duty?
So, no, unless this was an extremely high priority call, but generally they're focused on their own assignment, their off-duty assignment, and that's their responsibility.
Thank you, Deputy Chief. Did you want to add anything to that?
No, I think she made a very good answer. The one thing I would say is if officers that are working off duty are aware of a call, say for example, an officer working at Target would hear a call that is occurring right outside the door, officers do frequently then respond to that call, again, because of that proximity.
I see. So I think perhaps another way to state what you're saying, to summarize, might be that if a call comes in, it is likely that an off-duty officer would hear it and go to assist or help with that situation, even though they're not going to be the ones assigned to go deal with the situation.
I would have to say it really depends on the call itself and their proximity to where they are located. If they were, for example, working at Target Field, and if they are not in close proximity, although it says, it seems like they may be, they would not necessarily be leaving their position with a part-time job to respond to something.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you. I guess that's my questions in terms of process flow, but to Councilmember Fletcher's point, welcome Director Hughes. And our 911 dispatchers are truly part of our first responder coordinated effort, and I think all of us have been down there at some point in time. I know that our dispatchers experience a lot of secondhand trauma, and I'm curious what your thoughts are as a new director that has been here for about 2 months, what your thoughts are in helping our dispatchers work with that. I'm interested, concerned, and involved in how that works on the MPD side of things, and I'm just curious how 911 has been visioning the future of wellness and keeping your dispatchers healthy and well in their jobs that are increasingly difficult.
Yes, thank you. We are working really hard right now developing a peer support group for dispatchers. This has been initiated by them and by supervisors. We are in the early stages of it, but we are working very hard to get that implemented. We also have an EAP program. We also use a critical incident stress management team that one of our supervisors sits on, and he is part of the regional team. We utilize them when there is a big critical incident or even an incident where we just need their services. He's very good at getting that implemented for us. And I'm also working with City HR right now to bring in some training for dispatchers to deal with trauma response, stress and resiliency, boundaries, expectations, training on that level to help them. I am a big fan of helping with the trauma because a dispatcher deals with a lot and they never have an end to their story. They take many, many calls and the calls just end and they don't know what happened. So doing that day after day after day, they deserve to get proper training. So I am a big fan of that and working really hard on it.
Yes, I agree. Thank you.
Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Welcome as well. I believe I was the council member that brought the Pro QA challenges to the city coordinator's attention. I also helped write I tried to help the work environment by writing a staff direction around building a work group within 911 to begin to really think about the culture, what are the needs of the employees, and so I just wanted to let you know that I really very much so care about the folks that that you're responsible for and you're representing today. I was actually going to be asking a question about well-being as well, so thank you for that to my colleague. Do we have, what is the next system that, I'm glad to hear ProQA is going away, to be honest, because I was hearing not great things about it and the challenges that were being faced. Do we have a replacement system lined up?
We do not at this time. Right now, we are going to get through the end of the year, get the staff trained properly on handling calls that were only trained under ProQA. We are working on that right now. And once that's all completed, we will put together a group to evaluate if we need a protocol system, and if so, what should we move forward to. There is a purpose for protocol systems. We just would have to find the right one to meet the city's needs, especially police, fire, and EMS. EMS, it's great for. It's a very simple system for them, but police and fire, it's a lot more complicated.
Yeah. Well, great. Thank you for that answer. So I know that you all are not moving over to the new building, but will you be moving anywhere at all? Oh, I think we have the interim city coordinator coming on up, CFO extraordinaire.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Cunningham, I stepped in only because, Property Services reports up to FPS and ultimately the city coordinator, so it's probably more appropriate for me to answer that question. I would say, since I've been here at the city 3.5 years, the condition of 911's working environment is brought to our attention on a monthly basis. I know that MBC works hard to help staff here in their current conditions, but I can tell you it's a priority to find a better home for 911. It's not just up and moving workstations for 911. There are a tremendous amount of backup systems that exist within this building that are not easily replaceable, and so we have to factor that in as well. But you can certainly be assured that 911 has the attention of Property Services and the focus, and we will be bringing some options back to the council within the next 6 months on what to deal with in that space.
That's really great. Thank you for that update. I really appreciate that. I've talked to quite a few employees who are like, I love my job. I hate where we work, though, for the various conditions. And so I'm really grateful to hear that that is on the forefront of Property Services, and hopefully we can get a good outcome from that. So that's all I had. Again, welcome.
Thank you.
It's the leadership is really critical to culture change within the space, which I know a lot of employees were really hungry for. And so grateful for your leadership and excited to see how things shift.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I've got a few questions for MPD on what happens to the call once it gets assigned to the precinct squad or to the appropriate resources listed on this slide, police, fire, or EMS. So to focus on the police process, so just to clarify then, then the 911 dispatcher will then reach someone, a police officer, inside a squad car that's already circulating the city. Is that correct? Or I thought maybe it was directed to an actual person that would then send the call to MPD. If you can help me just understand that a little bit better.
Yes, ma'am. Madam Chair, the way that it works is that they notify an officer via your portable radio and the squad radios. So the dispatcher shares the information over the air. They're able, and they're probably better served to answer questions about how they're able to visually see where officers are located in their squads. And they are then dispatching, preferably the district squad that's assigned to the area where that call is occurring. They then will call them on the radio. In addition to that, all the squads are equipped with computers inside the squads, and that call will also be sent to their squad computer.
Okay, so the dispatcher has matches the geography based on the address where the 911 call is being reported.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and they identify the squad car and make contact with them directly. So it doesn't go to the inspector, it doesn't go to like a manager of 911 calls, it goes directly to the ground per se.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and what happens after the people in that geography get the call? What is their decision-making process like to send response?
So it's ultimately the officers in the squad receive the call, and then they respond to the call. So they then drive to the scene or the location where the call has been determined to have occurred and take the call from there.
Okay, and is there multiple people receiving the call, or is there just one targeted squad car that receives the call?
It really depends on the call.
Okay. In what instance would then a call be, would there be a delay in response, or I don't know how to describe it, competing priorities? What kind of a scenario would officers face that would maybe prevent them from immediately changing course to go where they're being asked to go?
If officers were already assigned to calls and there was perhaps no squad available because they were already all assigned to calls, is that what you're referencing then?
Mm-hmm.
So then the call, there would be no one available to immediately respond to that call.
And how do we log that information about somebody being not available? Is that something that gets then relayed back to the 911 center, or do we log it in the MPD system?
That's a very good question. So that call then, depending on, and this is really maybe better suited for these folks, but the call, depending on the priority level of that call, if it's a lower priority call, say someone stole my bicycle out of my front yard, it happened sometime overnight, so the urgency is not there for an immediate response because the incident occurred previously, and for that report to be taken. So that call would sit in pending, and officers would not be notified about that call over the radio. If a call was a high priority call, say a personal injury accident involving multiple vehicles, then that information would be aired over the radio, so that officers that are working in that precinct, and perhaps also depending on the precinct, you have MPD or Metro Transit squads in the area, would hear that there is a priority one personal injury accident involving multiple injuries, multiple cars, and they'd air that. At the time that they air that call, they will then ask for a response from the sergeant, the supervisor that is working on that shift, and that supervisor then acknowledges the fact that there is a high priority call pending for an officer to respond.
Okay, so I just want to be really clear on the process.
Okay.
So if there is a call that comes in and gets routed to a moving squad car, because I'm visualizing this process, right? So the call's not going to the 3rd Precinct headquarters, it's going to a
Right.
moving car.
Right.
An actual officer is able to respond. So if that officer has to say, you know what, I'm actually tied up in a different call right now, we can't respond to this, how do we capture that information?
You know, they would never dispatch a squad that's already assigned to a call, so that situation would not happen. If an officer would be, perhaps they're out on that bicycle theft and they're taking information in about the fact that a bicycle was stolen, and they hear that higher priority personal injury accident call, they could get on the air and say, can you please put this call that I'm on in pending, meaning I'll get back to it later. I've got all of the information I need for my report, and I'm going to take care of that later, and I'm going to head to this personal injury accident because it is a high priority call and they require the police assistance. Director, if you have a better explanation.
That was a great explanation. Madam Chair Cano, I want to add to that. So if you have multiple calls come in and you only have 5 officers that can answer those calls in a specific precinct, those calls have to go somewhere. They sit in pending, but that doesn't mean they don't get answered. There's priorities based on how the call is categorized, whether it's a priority call or not, a high priority or not. But those calls can sit in pending until the resources are available. If dispatchers need help, we reach out to the sergeant on duty that's overseeing a specific precinct, and they can make the determination to clear an officer from another call or to assign a different resource within the precinct. Does that answer your question?
It's giving me a better picture,
Yes.
yeah, because I'm trying to really understand how the process handles
Right.
competing priorities and how do we document where that information lives of how long it took to respond to a call and what priority that call had. So I'm assuming that you're saying this lives within your data gathering system.
Correct, yes. And that's one piece of the staff study, the discussion that we will be having to look at this to see if there's a better way we can, process the calls, and also within the work group using other resources.
Okay. I have one more question, but I'll see if, it looks like Councilmember Fletcher would like to have a word.
Thank you, Chair Cano. So if somebody's on, say, a self-initiated call, which is a majority of the calls, right? Our officers are looking at the world around them as they move through the precinct and see something they want to check out or observe something. Do they show up then as unavailable to the dispatcher, or does the dispatcher see, so like if somebody assigns themselves to a call because they see something they want to check out or they're doing a business check or whatever, do they show up as available to a dispatcher, or does that take them out of the queue as far as the dispatcher is concerned from your screens?
If they're assigned to a call, they would be on a call. If there's a higher priority need to use them, they would clear that call.
Got it. Thank you. But if there was another priority 2 or priority 3 call, that wouldn't necessarily bump, right? So we would bump them for a priority 1 call off of a self-initiated call, but some of the other calls would stay in pending because that officer's unavailable.
It really would depend on the call and their proximity to the call. If the officer is out on foot and doesn't see that a call has popped up on the screen, a lower priority call, they don't have the knowledge that the call exists. Now, as you described them being out on patrol, if they see that call pop up on the screen, then they would be able to say, oh, I acknowledge that call, we'll take it because we're only a block away. Oftentimes, too, dispatch, they do a great job, and they will let us know, I see you're in the area of this call, could you respond? And officers, even on foot, if they're out on a foot beat, will return to their squad to respond to that call.
Thanks.
Alrighty, I'm not seeing any more questions or comments here, so I just wanted to, I'm finished with the MPD portion of it, just wanted to ask you one last question on the 911 text. So what is the process for people to report things using their text, their phone? I saw a note here that we started the program in 2017.
Yes, that was a state initiative. It was actually brought forward by the hearing impaired community. They wanted another resource to reach 911 without having to use a TTY type system, which is you have to have a box connected to your phone and you type on the phone. This eliminated that, and we still have it, but we don't use it as often as text to 911. Callers can text their information. They don't necessarily have to be part of the hearing impaired community. They could just be in a situation where they're in fear for their safety. We've had people call that the person calling or the person driving a vehicle is impaired and the passenger is texting police to get help. It's also used oftentimes in domestic cases where the caller remains quiet and they use text to 911. Once the text call comes in, it looks just like a text on your phone on the dispatcher's console. So they communicate back and forth via text.
Okay, and they can just text directly to 911, the number?
Correct.
Correct, okay.
And you can text to 911 too if you ever want to see it. Just
how
make
it
sure you disclose that it's a test.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Yes.
All right, well, thank you all for your time. Really appreciate it. Thanks, everyone, for being here and helping us to have this conversation. Without further business before us, let's go ahead and receive and file this presentation on the 911 call process review. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. And we are adjourned. Thank you.